Welcome to the Wisconsin Podcast. I'm Craig Sauer. On this podcast, we talk Wisconsin things, everything from media, sports, culture, nature, politics, and more. On today's show, I talk with my dear friend, Noah Wishau. Noah recently started a podcast called Wisconsin's Hunting Heritage. What I love about Noah is that he thinks deeply about the things he cares about. He's well-read, interested, and always up for a good conversation. We had many in our years of college together. I asked Noah about what he's learning from talking to other hunters and conservationists. Why did you want to start a podcast about hunting?
Really was talking to you about your podcast and then was giving you names of people, and then it seemed like every person I was coming up with from Wisconsin was somebody that had to do with hunting and fishing. And I was like, well, if Craig's not going to do it, I might as well try to talk to him. And then between that and I guess just over the last several years, I've been getting more and more interested about where we're going as a hunting community and kind of where we came from. And, I picked up and read a Sand County Almanac again last year for the first time in probably since college. I think I read it. And it really struck me how big of a legacy guys like Aldo Leopold left. And then I started looking more into it and, reading about Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot and guys like that. And then all the way back, and John Muir was kind of in that time frame, and he wasn't really a hunter, but he was, just preserving the wild places. And with all of that, it just seemed like Wisconsin popped up again and again in this story. And so I wanted to look into it. So I guess that's part of it. And then the other part is just there's a lot of media out there right now of, it seems like it's shoot a big buck, stand there with a picture of a big buck and talk about how you shot this big buck and what kind of products you're using. And not every show's like that, but it seemed like there was a lack of emphasis on, I guess, the other parts of hunting and the parts that were most important to me. So I kind of want to try to tell that story and I'm interested in that, and I want to share it, I guess.
You brought up some names who are pretty famous in conservation of wild places. What did you find was true about hunting and conservation? What's the connection? What are you learning about that?
Well, I think most hunters have an idea, especially in this day and age of social media and Facebook memes and different things where the phrase hunters are conservationists comes up over and over again, but I don't think enough people know why that is. And really, when you look back on the history of the conservation movement in this country, pretty much every one of the pioneers was a hunter. I mean, all the way back to Audubon, and then, before him, Lewis and Clark, and all of them were hunters of some sort, and then stepped to the plate to preserve places. And obviously, Theodore Roosevelt was a big influence on all of this at the onset of the 20th century, but it's just in the last probably 50, 60 years maybe, where the term environmentalist came up. And it was different than a conservationist somehow, in the public mind anyway. I think when you hear, I've heard people talking about, or different interviews with different people talking about what environmentalist means to them, and it's a vegetarian who wears sandals and goes out and, a tree hugger type person, and conservationist somehow is different. And I think we as hunters need to do a better job of understanding we're all after the same thing, and that's making sure that these wild places are preserved, and we're able, us and our children and their children are able to enjoy them just as we have.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that non-hunters have of hunters?
Oh, I don't know. I think that's a question that's probably better answered by a non-hunter. So I don't know. Maybe I should ask you that question. And in fact, I'm planning on doing a podcast that talks to non-hunters and just sees, what do you guys think of us? I think, especially like a few years ago when the Cecil the Lion thing came up, and this idea of trophy hunting, and then this idea of, and big game hunting, and those terms get thrown around a lot. And, I'd have conversations with people and they're, well, I'm not against hunting, I'm just against big game hunting. And I'm like, well, are you against deer hunting? Because that's big game. I have head of a nice buck on my wall, shoulder mount, and I've got the racks of other deer. But I also ate every morsel of those deer. And then this was, I guess, am I supposed to throw the horns away? I don't understand. Does that make me a trophy hunter, or the fact that I kept it, or is it, what is it? And I think those terms get thrown around pretty willy-nilly by some people, and I think we need to understand what goes into all of that. And I don't know enough about African hunting to talk, but I do know the Boone and Crockett Club, for instance. That's one of the main scoring bodies of, I guess, trophies in the United States, and they were founded by basically the people I was just talking about. Gifford Pinchot and George Bird Grinnell and Theodore Roosevelt founded this organization basically to conserve these species. And in doing so, they conserved the wild spaces where these species lived, which in turn conserved the habitats for basically all species that we know.
Yeah, I think most people don't know that when like a lion or an elephant is taken in Africa, they often pay a really big sum to conservation groups in Africa, and a lot of that money goes to, in the right cases, when there's not poaching or something, it goes back into preserving the habitats for those animals. But do you understand, or do you have an understanding why a lot of people, even if when they hear that information and they just see a picture of a lion being killed, that they don't like that? Do you kind of understand why, or no?
Well, I think being we're the same age, we grew up in the 90s, and both of us probably saw The Lion King in theaters, and I don't think we have a cultural connection with lions like you and I don't. I often talk about, and it's not just me, other people talk about, I'd like to shoot and fill in the blank. Mostly for me, it's North American animals, but I don't want to shoot the first one I see. And that's because I'm interested in seeing animals and then maybe going to hunt them. But I don't know that if I went out and, for instance, a mountain lion out in the western United States in the Rockies, you can hunt them out there. I don't know that I'd want to hunt one. I'd like to see one, and then maybe I'd like to hunt them because I do think it's interesting. But I think that's the big thing. Getting back to the lions in Africa and the elephants, is we see them as either animals we saw in the zoo or that we see in nature documentaries, and we don't see them as we don't see the elephant destroying a village, or the meat from that elephant feeding a whole village, and then the same with the lion. When you disassociate yourself with the natural world, it's easy to, I guess, kind of personify them. And when the lion thing came up with Cecil the Lion a few years ago, people were all they could become endangered, and and it's true. But a lot of that comes down to not so much the hunters as the habitat destruction or habitat fragmentation, because they need to have a big range, and you might have 4,000 acres or whatever they need to be on, but if that's split up into 4 1,000 acre chunks, it doesn't work. And when you're talking about the money going to conservation movements over in Africa, really, like I said, I'm not an African expert. I've never been over there, but my understanding is it's the places where you can hunt these animals is funded due to hunting, and that's where these animals are. And then you have basically the rest of Africa there's a lot less habitat, and there's a lot less basically wildlife, is my understanding. Again, I'm not an expert, but looking at the North American model and the way we do things, that's really the case. That's really true. There's a lot of clubs, Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation have done just a ton of work making sure that places are protected, marshes for ducks or pieces of habitat in the Rocky Mountains for elk. And because of that, there's now more wildlife today than there was 50 years ago. And I think that, hunters deserve some credit for that.
What do you think is the biggest misconception of non-hunters by hunters?
I think part of it is just, you don't hunt because so you don't understand. Like I know you are I see your photos all the time of birds and different animals. So you're out doing stuff. And somehow we have in our minds, I think as hunters, that non-hunters' voices, either one, don't matter, which I think is absurd, especially given that, hunters make up less than 10% of the population. We have a good approval rating right now based on the work of a lot of the people I just mentioned, because I think the message had gotten out. But in all reality, I'm able to hunt for the most part, because, you haven't voted that I can't hunt. So that's part of it. And then just that you don't have a voice, or that that people don't understand, and somehow they're all against us. The only people that really get talked about that don't hunt by hunters are anti-hunters. And at least my view of things is hunters and anti-hunters probably make up roughly the same amount of the population, and then, maybe 10%, and then there's still 80% left that are just non-hunters, that either don't care about it or approve of it, or maybe lean slightly against us, but not enough to go out and wave a sign around. And I think that's one thing I think as hunters need to understand and do better, is it's not just hunters and anti-hunters. There's just a lot of people who either are ambivalent about it or support it under most circumstances. And we got to make sure that we put a good face on hunting and, show them that we are worthy of that, I guess.
I know there's been a decline in hunting. Fewer younger people are getting into hunting. Does that bother you?
I guess it goes back to what I was just talking about when it comes to, we hunt basically at the pleasure of non-hunters. That worries me. At the same point, as a hunter, there's less competition for, spots, locations to go hunting. If there's in a perfect world, I'd be the only hunter, and then I can hunt wherever I want it. But, that's not the way this works. So it goes both ways. I think it's a concern. For me, I think it's more a concern of just people disassociating themselves with nature and not getting out there and seeing it. And, looking back, today's my anniversary. So my marriage, and then the birth of my 2 children, and then the rest of the top 10 moments of my life, there may be one baseball thing in there, and then the other 6 are I was hunting or fishing or doing something screwing around out in the woods, and I saw something that, you'll never see again. So I guess that's worrisome, and I worry that we're going to get away from that. The other part is there's a lot of people who use these resources, but I think hunters are at the forefront of them. When I'm talking resources, I'm talking public lands, making sure that different places are protected. And when there becomes less of us, I'm worried that those things are going to start to go away.
As a non-hunter myself, I always think I love that you love nature. I love that you love seeing animals, because I do as well, but I don't necessarily want to, kill them. And I'm happy to support a national park or a state park in continuing to thrive. I'm willing to put my money on it. But so I think a lot of non-hunters will be like, well, you love nature in the same way I love nature, but why do you have to kill things? I guess what's kind of your response to something like that?
Should rename this podcast Deep Questions with Craig Sauer. My response to that is, it's hard to explain, and I don't think if you haven't done it, you don't get it. And I often talk about the worst part of hunting for me is the actual killing of the animal. I enjoy everything up to it, and then I enjoy the hell out of everything after it. But that moment is, and I don't want to call it the worst part. That might not be the right term for it, but it's a big mixture of, there's a lot of sorrow and a lot of, something's dying, and that's a heavy thing. But it's also does something, I've talked with other hunters about this, and everybody kind of agrees that if what it is that you feel when you shoot a deer or you get, an elk or basically anything. The feeling that you get there, if that's what it feels like to do one of these drugs that are plaguing our streets now, then I can kind of understand why people are doing it. And for me, it's all part of it. I mean, it's where we came from as a species, as humans. I mean, we evolved as hunters. I know we then developed agriculture and all of that, but I don't think that it's completely left us. And if you really want to understand nature at its core level, I think hunting is probably the best way to do it. I think you can spend a lot of time in the woods and you can do all of those, do all of that without completely understanding how everything works. And I don't know that I don't know if that's what you're looking for, and I'm not even sure that I explained it right myself, but that's it. It's part of the whole process is, process the meat and then you take care of it and then you eat it, and it's just one big cycle, and it's a cycle that's, 30,000 years old or better, 100,000 years old, whenever it is we kind of came about as a species. So I think that's really it. It's a way to understand nature at its base level and to become, instead of exploring or observing nature, it's a way to become part of nature.
This year during hunting season, I was kind of struck by a couple comments I saw on Facebook from some friends that were just, they didn't want to be seeing dead deer on Facebook because, that's what hunters do. They'll
Sure.
get their buck and they'll post on Facebook or it'll be in the newspaper or whatever it is. And I was struck by a number of people who said just outright, like, I don't want to see that. I'm wondering if you've gotten any reaction like that and what you think of people who comments and make comments like that.
I guess people who make comments like that, I get it. I don't really have fault with them. It's, it's, if it's not something you're used to, I can understand that. I've actually had this conversation quite a few places with other hunters, and I think it's a topic that we as a community need to talk about is what is the role of social media when it comes to hunting? Obviously I don't think by any means we should hide what we're doing, and I don't think it's something that should be hidden, but I think discretion's appropriate. There's several hundreds of magazine articles since the advent of social media about that very topic, how to take a picture respectfully of a deer or the animal that you've just taken, and it's as opposed to a pile of beer cans in the back of a truck laying over a deer. I mean, what does that do for anybody? I think we as hunters need to be cognizant of that. And I guess when it comes to the non-hunters, it's their opinion, and that, I don't know if it should offend them, but it's probably not something that you want to see. I guess I understand that.
In doing the podcast, first of all, who are some of the people you've talked to already, and what have you gotten out of it? What have you learned going through the process of talking to people who are big names in Wisconsin hunting and conservation?
Well, people I've talked to are, I talked to Tom Hauge, who is a retired wildlife supervisor or program manager for the DNR. He retired kind of involuntarily last year with the new, I guess there's a lot of turmoil in the DNR right now. But he, along with a number of other retired DNR people and other environmentalists, has started a group called Wisconsin Green Fire, which basically is a bunch of scientists and retired, like I said, biologists and those type people who are concerned about where we're going as a state when it comes to these issues. So I talked to Tom about that, and then he actually wrote a issue paper on a proposed bill on wolves and the ability of conservation officers or state officers to enforce basically any laws that have to do with the timber wolf. So we talked in depth about that paper. I also talked to George Meyer. George he was the DNR secretary under Tommy Thompson. He's now the director of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation, and George and I had a nice talk and talked about a lot of the same issues that I talked about with Tom in the, changing culture and climate regarding the DNR, as well as a number of bills that have been brought up by politicians and legislators who, I guess I talk about them as they wear a green hat or they wear a camo hat or a blaze orange hat in their campaign photo and talk about how they're our best friends, and then they propose bills that probably aren't in the end the best for us. And so George and I talked about that. I also talked to actually a friend of mine, Scott Repke. He's a biologist for the DNR. He's working up in Black River Falls and is working on the elk project up there. So I talked about the elk reintroduction project with Scott. I talked to Scott Zimmerman, who's the head of the Wisconsin Trappers Association, and we talked about what his organization does and trappers and just what issues that trappers are facing. And then the last person I talked to that I released the episode last week is Jim Posowitz. Jim is a Sheboygan native. He actually has spent most of his life in Montana, but he's written a number of just incredible books kind of about the history of the conservation movement in America, and particularly hunters' roles in it. I think I've learned just the amount of passion that these people all have. And, all of them, with the exception of Scott Repke, who's my age, are from the generation before me, would be fair to say. They're all retired of some sort. And the amount of work that they put into things and the passion they have, I'm doing this part-time. I got 2 little kids, so a lot of my podcast interviews are taking place either on weekends or, after my kids go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, and these people are all more than happy to I guess, put up with that and then sit down and talk to me because they're so passionate about these issues. And I think we as hunters, are like everybody else. We don't necessarily trust the things that are happening when it comes to the government and the laws that are being passed or the enforcement of those laws. And, a lot of these people are the people that were doing these things, especially during my lifetime growing up. They're the ones who were in the room when these decisions were being made. And then when you talk to them, you just realize, first of all, how hard these decisions were. Second, why they did what they did. And third, for the most part, that they were probably right, even if we didn't like it at the time. And they were, using their education and basically dedicating their lives to make sure that I have the ability to go out and catch a bucket full of bluegills on an afternoon like today, or go out and, shoot a duck or two in early October. So I think that's what I've really learned is just how passionate people are about this and the amount of work that a small group of people have done to ensure that this lifestyle has gotten to my generation in order that we can, I guess, continue it and hopefully pass it on to my kids.
In talking to these people, has it made you more passionate about hunting?
Yeah, I think so. I think without a doubt. And it really has opened my eyes to the legislation that we were talking about. And I guess I've always kind of been a political animal. I mean, I've majored in political science in college, and you obviously know we spent a lot of time talking about it. But now I'm really I find myself really more focused on hunting and fishing issues, and that's kind of been a culmination over the last several years. It's just finally gotten to a point of you get torn so many different ways when it comes to politics because nobody has a platform that I guess is completely coherent. Neither side does. And I think hunters are really stuck in that, probably more so than most segments of the population. I talked about in my first podcast or my first episode talking about the left wants to take away our guns, and then the right wants to take away our lands where we can use our guns to hunt. So I don't know, we've been stuck there for 30, 40 years now, and it's just, how do we navigate that, I guess?
Well, you brought up guns, and I mentioned I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I mean, we don't have to go too far into it, but
sure.
It is something that's in the moment right now. Do you think sportsmen have a responsibility to come to the table and talk about gun control in light of, school shootings that we're seeing fairly regularly around the country now, and especially after what happened in Florida?
I think that we should always be at the table. I mean, we are obviously there's a lot of bow hunters, and I'm a bow hunter, and but for the most part, we're gun owners. And so, of course, I think we need to be at the table. What the right answer is, I don't know. And I don't know that anybody knows. But we should, I think, certainly be at the table, of course.
It just does seem like there's a lot of people who just won't even engage with any kind of, once the words gun control are put in a sentence, they just won't even go to the table.
I think that's true, and I mean it's such a hot button issue, and it's become such a thing where even talking about it can get people in trouble. I don't know if you know the name Jim Zumbo. He was a outdoors writer. I mean, kind of a legend when it came to outdoors writing. I think he was with Outdoor Life, but he might have been with Field and Stream before that. I mean, he'd just been everywhere, and he was the guy that everybody talked about when it came to writing on different issues and hunting and all of this stuff. Well, anyway, probably, I want to say we were probably just getting out of high school. So 2000, 2001, 2002, he was on a hunt out in Wyoming. I think they were coyote hunting, and somebody, I don't know if they were using one or he was informed that people were starting to use AR-15s for coyote hunting. And well, anyway, he went and wrote a blog and posted basically, I think he probably even used the word terrorist gun, and it has no place being hunting. And it really destroyed him. He had torn apart, and I mean, this guy had sponsorships all over the place. Everybody pulled their sponsorships. He had to go through, eventually he came back out and said, I was tired and when I wrote this, and I shouldn't have hit send, and I didn't really understand what these guns were. And he, it was kind of basically a public beatdown on him for basically just coming out against it. That's the society we live in, and it's not just guns. It's basically in anything. Is if you open your mouth and make a political statement, half the country's going to hate you and want you torn down. And it's not just, like I said, it's not just guns. It's, be it if you're kneeling down on a football field, or if you come out in support of women's rights, or you come out and you say something, that's pro-life, you should just keep your mouth shut, and that's none of your business. And that, I think, says more about the public discourse in this country than it does hunting, fishing, or even the gun debate itself.
You're a lawyer. I mean, you've worked as a prosecutor, right? As
Sure.
An assistant district attorney. I know you've interned in the office of Republican state representative. You've been around politics. You've been around. I'm sure you've seen gun violence in a courtroom, or you've dealt with it in a courtroom.
Sure.
I guess with those experiences in mind, I mean, where is your mind at on just? Can things be done? I mean, is it worth talking about it if you're just going to be torn down, like you were saying?
I don't know. I don't know. I think what we're seeing right now, you obviously brought up Florida. That just happened this week. I don't know when this is going to be released, but to me, I think we're going to see the same cycle that we see every time, which is everybody's mad. The one side saying that, it's not guns. The other side's only saying it's guns. And eventually what's going to happen is the left is going to come out and probably try to introduce legislation. And I think what's going to happen, because it's happened so many times before, is whoever's the face of that legislation is going to make some statement that's inaccurate when it comes to the capability of these weapons. And then the right is going to jump on that. And, I've been there before where, okay, maybe something should be done. But then they come out and they're talking about an AR-15 shooting 600 rounds a minute. Well, that's not true. And then, I guess for me, I'm going, well, why do I want you making a law if you don't even understand what these weapons do? But that just seems to be the cycle. whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think a conversation needs to be had. I don't know if it's where that ends up being. And I think both sides want to oversimplify it. One side just wants it's a gun issue and we got to get rid of the guns. And the other side, it's a mental health issue and we just, we got to take care of mental health. And I think the only way to protect us from these types of tragedies is really you're going to end up taking the rights away from a lot of people, not only when it comes to guns, but, handling mental illness and things like that. Are you talking getting asylums going again and putting people away easier? That's stomping on rights too. And I just, where do we draw the line? I don't know. So I guess I just don't know what the answer is, and I don't think anybody's going to be completely happy with it in the end.
Well, I think what you say, you don't want Democrats making the law or liberals making the laws about guns.
I don't think it's not that I'm really saying that. The problem is the people who, it seems like the people who come to the forefront and are trying to do things end up where it turns out they don't really understand what they're talking about, or, they're kind of easily dismissed by people who have any knowledge of the weapons themselves because they come out and put their foot in their mouth.
I think that goes to the point of something in my mind is like, I think the only way something is going to get done is if sportsmen do it, if sportsmen or hunters like kind of take the lead and say like this, we're going to do something and propose something. But there just seems to be nobody willing to go that route, to like take the lead for Republicans to go out and be like, here's a plan.
And part of that, is probably true. But I think the thing that always amazes me when this comes out, and being a hunter, I'm thankful for it, is most people are calling for the end of gun control or for gun control and whatever. It's always, unless you're a hunter, you have no business having a gun. You see that a lot. And as a hunter going, oh, okay, thanks. But at the same point, when you read the Second Amendment, it doesn't say anything about hunting. That's not why we're allowed to own firearms in this country. So I don't know. I get what you're saying, and I think that sportsmen are obviously make up a percentage of the gun-owning public, but I don't know where our responsibility lies on this.
Are you a member of the NRA?
I have been in the past.
And not anymore?
I kind of come and go with the NRA. It's more just, and not so much in support of them or not support of them. It's more just, I'm more of a, if I think of it, I better send my money to them. But you only have so much money to go around. Right now I'm a member of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and some other conservation groups that I think is where the work really needs to be done right now. And I guess that's not mutually exclusive by any means. I just didn't send in my paperwork for the NRA. It wasn't a political choice necessarily.
Is there anything else that you think about when we keep hearing about these acts of violence, which are just shocking, kind of at this point? I mean, Las Vegas. I mean, everything. I guess what's your just gut feeling about it as far as like a human being?
Well, as a human being, obviously, it's senseless, and I mean, they're tragedies. There's no other way to put it than to see all this happen, and it happens over and over again. It's senseless, and it's just stupid. I guess, and that's pretty much. I don't think anybody can say anything other than that.
What are some of the biggest issues, do you think, for hunters in Wisconsin or just in the country in general?
I think right now what you're seeing in Wisconsin is we're going away from what got us here. I guess, you always, when you basically it feels like we're the Seahawks in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago with, we're on the goal line and on the 1 yard line, and we go to the pass. And it seems like kind of that's what we're doing. We're going away from the science. I have a major concern of the legislature not necessarily listening to the DNR, and in fact, the DNR not even being invited to testify in front of the legislature right now on bills, not only on hunting and fishing, but overall. But that's a big concern. It's just, why wouldn't we listen to these people who are out there every day and, are scientists and are experts in these fields? Obviously, on a national level, the public lands issue, I think, is big. I mentioned Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I think they're a great organization, and they're kind of at the forefront of this. We need wilderness in this country. And, I think about a lot that, I don't know that I'm ever going to get to go to some of these places, but the fact that they're there makes my life better somehow, just because they're there. And, if something were to change, I could go wander around for a long time out in the wilderness and seeing these places. And I want them to be available for my kids to have the same capability. I think on a national level, that's a big deal. In Wisconsin, I actually just talked to a gentleman talking about chronic wasting disease, and it's getting to be not just a Wisconsin issue. I mean, it's always been out west, or has been out west for a number of years prior to coming here, but now it's starting to, Michigan, I think, has a case, and I'm not sure if it's gotten to Minnesota yet, but I know they're gearing up for it. And
that's a disease that affects deer.
It's
their brain, right?
It's basically mad cow disease for deer and for members of their family. And that came 2002, 2003. And we kind of had put it on the back burner for a number of years. And now it's we're getting to a point now where we need to do something quick, or I think it could get out of control and we could have a big problem here. That's something that we as hunters need to start really focusing on and figure out a solution for it. So I think that's a big thing. And then obviously, I think when we talked about the declining hunting numbers, social media, and our presence on social media is big, and we, just making sure that we're portraying ourselves in a way that we need to be, or we should be portrayed, and in a way that the majority of the hunters in this state and country do act. And by majority, I mean vast majority. There's always a bad actor, and I think we need to do, and we have done, a good job of condemning them. But just like anybody else, when the outside is attacking, then you got to make the decision of, do we close ranks, or do we, what do we do? And I think that's always an interesting phenomenon whenever something like this happens, is, okay, what exactly happened? Did he act ethically, or she act ethically? And if so, then we need to defend them. But if not, then we need to condemn them. And I do think we do a good job of that, but we need to continue to do so.
Can you tell me when you first maybe realized that you love hunting, or when you fell in love with hunting?
No, I don't remember. It just feels like I've always done it. I remember I was just following along with my dad, really, and most of my life it's been hunting and fishing. Like, it's almost one word. That's what I like to do. And really, I think fishing is just kind of an offshoot of hunting, because really it's very similar. But I mean, I've just always done it, be it following my dad around the woods or going out on the lake, either ice fishing or out in the boat fishing. And I guess, I don't know, it's kind of like a lot of things that you fall in love with. Sometimes there's there's that moment, but a lot of times you just don't even really know. It just happened. And in this case, it's just something that I've always done. Like, I don't, I talked about baseball a little bit earlier. I don't remember falling in love with baseball. It's just something that I always did, and that's what I like. So I guess that's it.
What do you hope to teach your kids? Your kids are still pretty young, but what do you hope to teach them about hunting as they get older?
Teach them about hunting. I'm just going to teach them, how to hunt and how to behave ethically. And then, I want to make sure they know the story of how we got here, and what I think the sacrifices that over the last 120, 130 years people have made to make sure that we still have a place to hunt, and that there's still animals here for us to hunt. So I want to make sure they know that. But then just how to hunt and fish, obviously, is just, I want to teach them that. But I think for me, it's more what hunting and fishing can teach them. One of the things that it teaches you is, is perseverance. There's talk about it a lot of different times, but I was just telling somebody where I was out in North Dakota a couple of years ago, and a buddy of mine and I ended up, we were about a mile away from our truck, and then we wanted to go check on some potholes, and then we jumped a pheasant, and we kept walking and walking. We didn't have any water with us, and all of a sudden we had 4, 5, 6, 7 miles on our boot leather to get back to where we had dropped our bags and decoys and all that stuff, and threw those up on our shoulder, and we still had a mile to go back to the truck. And it was just, there's no time to complain. Like, we could sit there and complain, and man, this sucks, and you got to do this, and it was like an 80-degree day, and they're thirsty and all this, but why? It doesn't help the situation. You're still a mile from the truck. So I think hunting and fishing teaches you that. It teaches you to be uncomfortable, and that you can put up with discomfort, and it's not the end of the world. It obviously teaches you patience. It teaches you just that. You got to, I think we as a country are very used to being comfortable. And I think we're very used to, especially this day and age, of the instant gratification of, flipping on the TV or looking at your cell phone to find something out. And hunting and fishing aren't that. And I don't know if that has to do with the decline in numbers or not, but I think there's a lot of value in learning those traits. Life isn't always easy, but you just kind of keep moving on.
And what would break your heart more, if neither of your kids play softball or baseball, or neither of your kids become hunters?
I don't know if breaking my heart's the right term. I mean, I think, my daughter's 5, my son's 2. I think, if 5.5 years ago you had asked me that question, I might have had an answer for you. But now that I have kids, it's kind of, I just think they're cool. I mean, not all the time. They're a pain in the ass sometimes, but I think they're cool, and what they want to do is cool. And, I'll be there for them. And, I've already sat through some dance recitals, and I expect to sit through some more. And that's cool too. I complain and might give her a hard time about them, but it's what they want to do. I hope they want to do it, but I'm not going to make them do it. And, my wife doesn't hunt, and we've had that conversation about when I take my daughter fishing, or, go get her out hunting and doing stuff like that. It's, my wife, I think, had in her mind that it was going to be middle and end of November, and I was going to make her go sit in 20-degree weather, and we were going to sit there all day. And you can't do that to little kids. I'm talking, it's a nice day, maybe early duck season, or, turkey hunting this spring or something where it's nice. We'll go sit for an hour or two. And when she starts fidgeting and getting bored, then we'll stop. And I think the way I look at it is, you got to learn to love it before you're going to be willing to suffer for it. And I think my dad did a good job of that for me. And, it takes a lot to drag yourself out of bed before light and go out, and it's 10 degrees out, and you're going out and you're going to sit all day, and you're not coming back to the cabin and the fire until dark. And you gotta learn to love it before you're willing to do something like that. So hopefully I'm kind of easing them into it. And my daughter desperately wants to go ice fishing, and it seems like every time we can go, it's either 10 degrees or below, or it's 30-mile-an-hour winds. And for a 5-year-old, that's just not something that I want to that's not the first experience I want her to have, I guess. So I guess they're free to do what they want.
Well, okay, and I saved the most important question for last, which is, are the Brewers going to be in the World Series this year?
They still haven't signed a pitcher, so I don't know. I wish they'd find somebody, but I'm a David Stearns fan, so in Stearns we trust, and I think he's gonna figure something out. In the World Series this year, I don't know, but next year, yeah. So, yeah, I think they're right there. I think we can use another pitcher, and I think they're going to be in the conversation. What worries me, and I just saw that Vegas put put them out at like 84 wins, couple wins short of what they did last year, is we had a lot of guys with career years last year, and I'm worried that they're not going to have another career year. So I don't know, can you count on that? But they obviously made some improvements in the lineup and in the outfield. Now we just got to hope for a pitcher. Hope we can figure it out.
Thank you to Noah. If you're interested in hunting, definitely check out his podcast, Wisconsin's Hunting Heritage. And of course, make sure to subscribe to the Wisconsin Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. If you're liking the show, please rate or review the show on your podcast service. It goes a long way in helping new listeners find the show. Also, you can stay in the loop about the pod by visiting wispod.com, following the show on Twitter at wispodcast, and on Facebook at the Wisconsin Podcast. Cheers.